Welcome to Dealing with the Writer Demons with Tiffany Yates Martin. She is the author of The Intuitive Author, just released, about how to grow and sustain a happier writing career. She's going to be talking about some of the ideas that are in that book. And personally, I just want to say the longer I am in this business, the business of writing and publishing, the more I believe it is an intensely psychological battle, more so than a battle of craft, technique, or skill, which maybe some people would gasp at that. But I find that the psychological challenges don't go away, no matter how successful you are, no matter how experienced you are. You can get more experienced at dealing with them, but they don't ever completely evaporate. So these are, in my mind, some of the most important skills to acquire how to deal with these. Now, before we get underway, I just want to thank a sponsor. Barbara Kyle is this month's sponsor. If you receive my free newsletter, Electric Speed, you would have seen a mention of this in yesterday's issue. She has a free webinar coming up, Your First 30 Pages. This is for writers of narratives, so novels and memoir. If you're interested in that free webinar, just visit the link that you see on the slide and you can register at no cost to you. So thank you, Barbara, for sponsoring Electric Speed and these free sessions. All right, many of you probably know Tiffany because I host quite a number of classes with her every year on the craft and technique of storytelling, usually fiction writing. And you've probably heard me read her conventional bio as well. But for those who might not be as familiar with her, she has published her own novels under a pen name, Phoebe Fox. She has spent decades, really the entirety of her career in my mind, as a freelance editor. And she is the author of 2 books for writers, The Intuitive Author being the latest one. I have actually an interesting personal story to share about Tiffany. If I'm remembering correctly, she emailed me cold, or at least I considered it a cold email, around 2020. So like in the heart of the pandemic. I think her first book on writing had just come out, and I think maybe Tiffany, you reached out with an idea for a guest post, or I was going to run an excerpt or something. And then the relationship started from there. But it was a really good cold email. And whenever people email me cold, I do recognize that it takes, kind of, I don't know, expecting to get attention, expecting to get a response, expecting or hoping that you won't get rejected. So I always respected that she was able to just do that and hope for the best. I don't know if you remember doing that, Tiffany.
Oh, I do. You're very unintentionally intimidating.
Okay. So I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to hand things over to her, and she's going to share, some of the concepts from the book for maybe a half hour or so, and then we'll have some informal conversation. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. Hi. Yes, as Jane was saying, I've been doing this for a long time, and usually I do focus on craft-based things, especially with Jane. We do a lot of that. But this new book that I have is all about the parts that Jane was just talking about that are not about actual writing, which I think is often the bulk of what building a successful writing career is. Not just the demons, but things like advocating for yourself as an author, keeping your motivation, balancing writing and life, taking control of your career. But the demons have their own section in the book because I frankly tend to suffer from them quite a bit myself. Jane and I were talking about that before we started, and she was just talking about Mark's demons. And I was talking to a friend that I have at the dog park about doing this today and what it was about, and that it was for writers. And he said, but doesn't everybody experience things like that? And I said, yeah, I think they do. But for some reason, I think, I'm going to go ahead and share while we're talking. I think that creatives tend to experience them maybe even more keenly, partly because we are very sensitive and attuned to those things, partly because we spend a lot of time dealing with shadow sides with like our characters, and demons very much are our shadow side. And partly, I think, because we're constantly sharing very personal, vulnerable things, which is really fertile stomping ground for demons. We're going to be personifying them quite a lot today. So I don't mean, this is not a religious type of a demon. So divorce it from that. Let's think of them as Halloween demons. But it helps me to both personify them and also render them harmless. So that's you're going to be seeing any number of demons. I'm assuming most of us who are here know exactly what we're talking about when I say demons, but just to define it, I was looking at the chats before we started, and I think most of us are on the same page here. It's those negative inner messages that we are giving ourselves for all the obstacles that authors can encounter in their careers. A lot of times the worst obstacles come from inside of us. And as I said, I think most people probably understand these negative inner messages. Although once I was talking to a friend of mine about having a bout of imposter syndrome, and she goes, "What's that?" And she's German, so I figured it was a language barrier. So I explained to her what imposter syndrome is, and she goes, "That doesn't make any sense, but you have all of this experience." So she couldn't fathom doubting her own efficacy at something. But I would imagine that most people have some kind of demon, even if it's not imposter syndrome, which is one of mine. I was looking again at your chats and I saw several of these: perfectionism, procrastination, competition, comparison, the fear of failure, and its little weird flip side, the fear of success. Writer's block, which I put in quotes for reasons we'll discuss. Actually, we won't discuss later, so I'll tell you now. Writer's block is often seen as like this external thing that's standing in the way of us writing, but I think it often stems internally from these demons. And you guys have been talking a lot about self-doubt already in the chats. That's basically what all of these demons are. They make us doubt ourselves. They give us messages like this. I even saw some of you write some of these almost exactly. You're no good. You've never been any good. You're not good enough. Your work's not good enough. You're a big fraud. You will never do this. Your work sucks and you suck. The past successes were a fluke and you're all washed up. Who do you think you are? That's one I get a lot. Also, we're going to go a lot into my personal demons today. I'm going to reveal a lot of pretty personal stuff, but I think that these are so universal, and sharing them is part of what I think helps us deal with them. But your demons might come up in any dark night of the soul, any literary dark night of the soul, when you've written something that was good, you know, the day before, and then the next day you see what garbage it is, or when you're staring at your blank page, knowing that nothing you have to say is worth writing, or that every word you're writing is garbage, or when you get rejected, or when you get criticism, or when you hear crickets, or when your release doesn't do as well as everyone hoped that it would, or it quickly fades from view, or you're in a group of a bunch of writers and you know you're the weak link. We could go on. Demons have some hobbies in common. They like to party, and they like you to party with them. So they fill you full of smack. And the smack are these unrealistic messages that they're giving you, but they start to feel true to you because you get into this spiral of negative messaging. And before you know it, you're helping them undermine your own confidence and filling you with self-doubt. And they may even stop you from writing altogether. I call this, when it happens to me, globalization and eternalization, which is basically everything sucks and it will always suck. So I really inflate this problem that I'm having that is a realistic, manageable problem, but the demons have me so hopped up that I can't think straight. And I start thinking this is truth, and it's truth about everything, and it's unchangeable. So then you're in this horrible little death spiral of demonism, and it's really hard to break out of it. A lot of the techniques I'm going to hopefully share with you that will be helpful are drawn from my experience, but they're also drawn from spending 30 years talking to authors about similar experiences and hearing how they're handling it and what the messages they're getting are, what works for them, what doesn't work for them. They're drawn from psychology. I am not a therapist, but if being in therapy a lot makes you an expert on psychology, then I'm freaking Freud. They are drawn from Eastern thought. They are drawn from research on compassion. And I've just sort of brought a lot of these different techniques in. Jane and I were saying before this started that you're never going to really stop feeling these things. They're human. And so it makes sense that we feel fear and pain and doubt and shame and everything else that is gloriously human. But we can get better at learning to recognize that it's not reality and how to get out of those so that we can continue to work. So where do our demons come from? So I'm going to tell you a personal story. This is me at an adult spelling bee a few years ago. But the story I'm going to tell you is not as an adult. It is from childhood, where everything terrifying lives. That is when I was maybe third, fourth, fifth grade. I don't know, but I was a good student and I was very gifted at writing and I was a great speller. And so my teacher wanted me to go into the spelling bee, and I did, and I just expected I was going to win that thing. And instead, I got knocked out in a very early round when I misspelled the word analyze. Yes, I remember decades later what the word was. I put an I in it, which was mortifying and embarrassing. And spank, suddenly two demons were born: imposter syndrome and perfectionism. Because imposter syndrome was clearly, I am not as smart as everybody thinks I am. And perfectionism was, in order for me never to feel this way again, I must never make a mistake. And that way I will never risk embarrassing myself this way and letting people see what a phony I really am. That's how demons work. If you think about it, it's very much like our characters. When we are trying to find a wound for them that usually stems from a misconception, is any of this ringing a bell with your character development work? That's the same thing that happens to us. So on the plus side, great fertile ground for you as a writer. On the negative side, really unpleasant to deal with. But the demons they come into existence not to torture you, even though that's effectively what they do, but to help you. They want to protect you from feeling this uncomfortable, unpleasant, painful thing that whatever happened to you made you feel, but they're framing it through the lens of the child that you were when it happened. So in my childhood understanding, of course I thought, well, I'm clearly a fake. I'm not as smart as they think I am, and I must never mess up again. But I'm not a child anymore. I'm a rational adult. But the demons don't age. They stay little stunted children deep in the psyche of your mind, in the cave where they live, and they continue to operate under these misconceptions. So it's up to us to remember that we're the rational adult and to also counter their childhood messaging with reality and hopefully compassion, which we'll talk about. So let's say you get imposter syndrome and perfectionism and fear of failure demons when you are in fourth or fifth grade, and then you decide you're going to release some books. I'm guessing any of you who've done that or who've shared your work in any fashion know the vulnerability in doing so. As Jane said, I've got 6 novels published. Some are by a major publisher. I've published both of these books. The first one has done extremely well. I have 30 years of experience at what I'm talking about. I have shop tested these theories over many years with many authors and beta readers and in keynote speeches, and I'm confident of them and very proud of them. And last week, with my book coming out on Tuesday, I wound up in my husband's office, which is right down the hall, and I said, I don't know about this book. I think maybe I'm going to embarrass myself by publishing this thing. I don't think there's anything original in there. I don't know if this is really going to help people. I don't think I covered everything I'm supposed to cover. I don't think it's going to do very well, and people are going to hate it. And I've shown a lot of really personal things. This is a terrible idea. And that was, of course, my personal baby demons: imposter syndrome, perfectionism, fear of failure. So let's go through in real time how one might handle such a thing. So the first thing is to provide evidence to yourself that the messaging is false. I don't necessarily have to consult this anymore, but many years ago, I started what I call the cookie file, and I call it's compliments, okay? It's nice things people have said about me, my work, my presentations, or whatever. If you've ever sent me a compliment, it's in the file. But here's why I call it cookies. Cookies are delicious. Everybody loves cookies, but you can't make a diet on cookies because it has no nutritive value. But if sometimes you just want a treat, and this is a good use for the cookie file, when you need evidence that this misconception that the little baby party demons are filling you full of, you can go to the cookie file. Or you can just learn to refute what they're saying, not say, oh, what you're saying isn't true, but provide the evidence Like, it's not okay to say, oh, you're a terrible writer. Well, no, you're not. You're a great writer. That's not going to help, as you probably all know, because when you tell people you're feeling that way, that's probably what they say. You have to actually find the hard evidence. So I had a friend tell me once she was sucking as a writer, she was going to quit. Do you have evidence that you're good at this? Actually, let's stick with me. So with my book, yes, I've shop tested these things. Yes, I've spent 30 years working on these. Yes, I have had great reviews for my last book, really good feedback from readers. And then after you've given yourself the reasons that this is not true messaging, then you give yourself, I had a therapist once who used to say to me, it was cognitive behavioral therapy, which I cannot recommend enough. And she would say when all these misconceptions, these cognitive distortions were happening, what might be a more reasonable way to look at this? What might be a more reasonable approach? So I love that word. So a more reasonable way of looking at it might be, it doesn't have to be fully original. Nothing is. We are all taking bits of ideas we've learned in the past, things from other books we've read, ideas we've gleaned from other things maybe that we're weaving into our own work, and we're making it ours. That's just the nature of artistic effort. It doesn't have to be the most exhaustive or the best book ever written for authors. In fact, there's no chance it will be realistically. So why am I aiming for something that's not possible? It doesn't have to be universally appealing. There's going to be some people who like it, and there may be some people who don't, and that's okay. Go look at the reviews of any book you've ever loved or hated, and you're going to see reviews from all over the map. People are subjective, and so is our art. And perfection is not possible. Those are all much more reasonable. One good way to frame it is, what might you tell someone that you cared about, or a friend, or the one I really love as a child? Most of us wouldn't speak to anybody the way we talk to ourselves in our negative messaging. So if you can imagine someone a friend of yours saying that they're experiencing this, or your child or a child baby you, it's really easy to be compassionate and gentle and rational in reassuring their fears, which is all that these things are. So here is a quick version of that story, because it relates to other techniques you can use to combat the demons. I was asked with one of my novels to come to the Texas Book Festival, which is very, highbrow, literary. There's a lot of celebrities there. There's a lot of public figures, bestsellers. And then there's me writing as Phoebe Fox, my sweet little beach reads. And I spend about, I don't know how many weeks just talking to my husband and anyone else who will listen about, what are they thinking inviting me? I'm going to be a total big sore thumb. Everyone who's there is going to know I don't belong. This is almost embarrassing that I'm going to be there. And I think I got tired of hearing my own nonsense, because by the time we drove to the festival that day, got out of the car, my husband and I are walking in, and I just stopped and I went, you know what? I'm not the worst author they've ever had at Texas Book Festival. And we both fell out. And it was hilarious. And that has now become one of my mantras, which is a great way to cope with demons. Come up with mantras. Jane and I were talking before this for perfectionism. I will often use good enough is good enough. And it's just like a little touchstone to remind me that I don't have to take any of this too seriously. And it's a shortcut to the rational thought that I'm trying to get to. But first, you have to acknowledge what you're feeling, because while these messages are not reality, the feelings are true and they're valid. And remember, they are deliciously and gloriously human. So it's perfectly normal that you would feel this way. One of the things my CBT therapist used to say that I also loved was, it makes sense that you would feel this way, or it's understandable that you would feel this way. Again, imagine a child coming to you and saying, there's a monster in my closet, and you wouldn't say, don't be an idiot. There is no monster in your closet, you dum-dum. Don't talk to yourself in a way you wouldn't talk to anybody else either. Focus on the intrinsic motivations and rewards. So when we're fearful of things happening, we are usually focused on outcomes, meaning things beyond our control, meaning how this is going to go. Sales, will an agent accept me? Will a reader like me? You don't know, you can't change that. So try to focus on the things that are within your purview, like, when I did this panel? What might I learn from these other panelists? Or isn't it cool that I'm up here? It's held in the Capitol building, as you can see, and it's very official and neat to get up there behind where like Congress sits. Isn't that neat? And look at these people who've come out to talk about it, and listen to these books that these people are discussing. And I can't wait to read those. Whatever those intrinsic things are, what's enjoyable about this, that can pull us out of that demon mindset. I already mentioned the mantras. Literally last week when I was in my husband's office freaking out, he said to me, that's all he said when I spun out for a minute. He goes, it's not the worst book anybody's ever written for authors. And immediately I felt okay. And I put an asterisk here because there are some fake it till you make it can be used in a way that is inauthentic, and that isn't how I mean it. But there are studies that show that for example, if people smile, their moods start to improve. So I will use things like, and I was doing it right before this started, Wonder Woman pose, because there are studies that prove that if you keep your chest up and your head high and your shoulders back and down and your feet spread apart and your hands on your hips, suddenly you feel confident. You could do the Roy Kent if you'd rather. That's a good one. Or Loki. Loki's always like alert and ready for battle. Or the Travis Tritt, 10 feet tall and bulletproof. But whatever you have to do to fake it till you make it, you will often find you start to feel that way. And remember that the way you think what you think people think of you is rarely what they're thinking of you. In fact, as Oscar Wilde said, you wouldn't worry so much what people think about you if you knew how rarely they actually do. So that helps too, I've been told after some presentations I thought didn't go well, how great they were. I've been told when I was a nervous wreck, God, you always seem so confident and relaxed. So trust that whatever you think you're showing, you're probably not showing. And everyone's too concerned with their own demons to even worry about yours anyway. It is very helpful once you are out of the demon storm. Don't do it in the storm because you're not thinking rationally at that point. But once the party's over and you and the demons are cleaning up, make them help you clean up their own mess, then start to see if you can find the commonalities of what brought on the demon attacks, because that's going to help you spot them sooner, recognize them as a demon attack, meaning this is not reality. This is just that negative internal messaging, and it's a scared child, and I can be the rational adult if you know what's going to kick that off. So here's another picture of me doing my literally very first keynote speech, which was a big jump for me because I had never done those before. I'd only done like presentations, workshops, and I was a nervous wreck. And it was a combination of what are often the most common causes of demon attacks, which is growth. I was trying something new. Challenge. Anytime you are doing something that stretches you, that's outside of your comfort zone, which this certainly was, then it's prime party territory for the demons. Vulnerability or risk. Public speaking is one of the biggest fears most people have. And this is coming from me, who started as an actor, and I still get nervous when I'm doing public speaking. So it's just always going to be there. Success is weirdly, for me anyway, and I think for a lot of people, let's say you get a six-figure book deal for your first book and it doesn't do as well, or it does do really well. Let's say you're Elizabeth, what's her name? Big Magic Woman, Elizabeth, whatever. We all know who I'm talking about. She said her second book was kind of really daunting to write, because how do you, after you've had Eat, Pray, Love, how do you follow that up? So success can be almost worse for the demons than failure, but that is another one. Setbacks and failure. You get a rejection from an agent that you thought was going to take you. Your book didn't sell as well as you hoped it would. Whatever, the story didn't come out the way you wanted it to. You're on your 50th revision and it's still not there yet. That can bring on a demon attack. And just overwhelm. When I did this speech, I had taken on a lot of commitments. And that's prime for me. That is prime demon time, because I think I'm stretched very thin. And so it's almost like when you let yourself get run down, you're more prone to get a cold. When you let yourself get overworked and stressed or burned out, you're more prone to the demons. My favorite way to deal with them, you've seen me personifying them a lot in this presentation, is to tend and befriend, to render them, to neuter them a bit, because I think we see these messages as these big, awful, scary things. And if we can reduce them and not take them quite so seriously, it makes them easier to deal with. I do that by personifying them with these silly little pictures that I've been showing you. I literally think of them as demons living in the cave. That's what mine look like. And I am crapping you negative, as they say in Raising Arizona. I literally picture them as little Underwood ham demons in my cave, in my brain. That's where they live. And sometimes they come out and they swarm my psyche. And that's when they're this big in my mind. And that's when I just gather them in my little palm. And I'm like, it's okay, demons, you can calm down. It sounds absolutely stupid. I told you I would reveal too much about myself today, but you would be amazed how it makes me feel very loving toward them. It makes me feel very protective toward them. And by them, I mean me. Understand that the demons are us. So all of this helps me be kinder, to love myself a little bit more, to not take myself so seriously when I'm feeling this way, to take care of myself. Make your demons look like whatever you like. You want your demon to be a little Pac-Man? Great. You like cats? Have a cat demon. Your demon's a tantruming child? Great. Make your demon in diapers, throwing a tantrum. The trick is to make them lovable in whatever way you can, to neuter them. When they come at you, it goes against everything we have because we want to defend. We are feeling fear and pain, and we want to slam up the walls. We want to deny that we feel it. We want to suppress it. We want to kill it forever. But if we can meet that with acceptance and compassion, just as you would with a friend or your child or anybody that you care about, already that takes a lot of that power away, and it takes a lot of the weight of it away. Remember that the feelings are real, but the messages are not reality. It's the fearful, childish part of us that we all have that is trying to cope and protect us in the only way it knows how, which is through a child's understanding. And it helps me also to know that the demons are me. They are a piece of me, and you cannot get rid of them. They will always be with you. You just get better, as Jane said, at spotting them, at dealing with them, at peacefully coexisting with them. And honestly, I really kind of love mine because there is a good side to them too. Like we were talking, Jane and I, before this started, that perfectionism has its rewards as well. Like it makes you really good. Competition and comparison can inspire you, can spark you to work harder and do more, can show you what success looks like or what you might strive toward, makes you better. So here's my 5-step plan that kind of sums up everything we've talked about. And then I'm trying to stop a little early so we have lots of time for questions, but I also do have like individual demon slides if we want to do that. Because why? I'm a perfectionist and I over prepare so that I never embarrass myself. First thing, get some space. When the demon attack starts, remember that you cannot cope with it if you are in the middle of the party. So you got to leave the room. That could mean like self-care, go take a bath, get your mind off of it. Don't sit there spinning. Step away from the keyboard. Go for a walk in nature. Play with your pets. Go call a friend who makes you laugh all the time. Do anything other than party with the demons. Once you can get some objectivity, just like when you're trying to edit your own work, identify what you're feeling and let yourself feel it and accept it because it's human, and offer yourself some kindness and grace. Kristen Neff is a compassion researcher, and she has a 4-step mantra that she uses. This is a moment of suffering, identifying it. Suffering is natural, which is basically saying it's human. Suffering is a part of life, I think is what she says. May I be kind to myself in this moment is the 3rd part. And the 4th is, may I give myself the compassion I need? Because isn't that what we need when we feel that way? We're asking for reassurance and compassion. Then identify what that cognitive distortion is. What is the false message that demon is filling you full of? And counter it with rational, realistic responses. The book comes out on Tuesday, has a whole big section going into every little demon individually. It also has a lot of other, I'm calling it a survival guide for writers, because it helps you with the squishy skills of tending to yourself as an artist that will allow you to be a successful writer in your career. And with that, I will give it back to Jane and over to you all for questions.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share.
That would be great.
We do have a number of questions, but I just wanted to add, my 2 cents on a couple of these things because I can. Uh, I really, I really liked the discussion of seeing yourself as a child or seeing the demons as part of the child like aspects of yourself. It reminds me of what Alan de Botton says in so many of his books, particularly when you're dealing with relationships. So it could be marriages, it could be family. Um, and when he tries to like engender more compassion or kindness towards the other person, like if that person, if you feel like you're being mistreated or if they're acting like a petulant child, well, you know, realize we all still have that inner child and it comes out, and maybe they're tired and hungry, they didn't sleep well. And if your own child has a tantrum, you don't immediately say they hate me.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But we tend to say that about our partners.
Yeah.
We go straight to like the worst possible interpretation.
The way I've heard that is assume good intentions, which is
Yeah.
another mantra I very much like.
Yes. And that kind of ties into something else that's helpful for me. If I'm like, when you're kind of circling the drain of the net, like you talked about trying to get out of the room when that happens, when you can feel the circling happening. I try to tell myself it is not always going to feel this way. Like things will change. And I think you said that something like that at the very beginning. Sometimes
eternalization, globalization, and
right.
eternalization.
It will always and forever be like this, and it will never ever change.
Right.
Which is of course false.
But it feels so true in the middle of it, doesn't it?
It does.
Yesterday, our favorite pickleball place told me they were closing, and in the car on the way home, I said to Joel, well, I guess I'll never play pickleball again. He goes, way to eternalize, babe.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead into the Q&A. Okay. I'm going to start with most upvoted. Colin says, my shrink suggested that part of the reason my self-talk is so scathing is related to what makes me an okay writer. Quick linguistic synapses, instant metaphors, etc. I'm internally lacerated before I even know what is happening. Do you see any truth in this, that a writer equals ruthless self-talk?
Adam Grant, who is an organizational psychologist I love, who has a podcast, a bunch of books that all are incredibly worth reading, talks about this, that the things that we regard as these negative things or weaknesses in us can actually be our strength. Like I was talking about, perfectionism has a good side. Imposter syndrome has a good side. It makes you strive. I think there are ways, at least in my experience, we can do that with the carrot or we can do it with the stick. And doing it with the stick, I mean, one of my little things I say to authors all the time is creativity never responds to the stick. It only responds to the carrot. It's like trying to berate or harangue your child into learning how to tie their shoes or whatever it is you're trying to teach them. Or the metaphor I always love is, a little seedling sprouts from the ground and you stomp it out because it's not a sunflower yet. I don't think, to me, that there's a value in taking a negative approach. Now, I have been accused of being a Pollyanna, but I do think we can be, I think the fear is that we have no discipline, we have no boundaries, and if we're nice to ourselves, we're just going to sit on the couch and eat bonbons. I don't know that that's true. I think if we motivate ourselves with positive things, that can be more powerful than trying to run from the punishing thing that we're flogging ourselves with. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so the next question is something of a personal one for you, Tiffany. Pat wants to know why you chose to write your novels under a pseudonym. Did it have to do with public perception? Would you do it again now?
So what I always said was that it was because I'm an editor first and foremost. It is my heart. It's the thing I love the most. And I never wanted authors I work with to feel that they were my second priority. They are my number one priority. My writing was my side gig. And then one day I realized that that was not the full truth. That was a big part of the truth, but a lot of it was that I had fear that I write light women's fiction. And I thought, if people read this, and I work in a lot of genres as an editor, and they don't like it, or they think it's stupid or silly or frivolous or whatever, they won't work with me as an editor. Or if it doesn't do well, if I'm not a huge best-selling author, then they will wonder why I think I can be an editor. They're two entirely different skill sets, but it's not always perceived that way. So when I released my last, I think, 2 books, I decided that I had to face the demons, and I couldn't authentically work with authors going through all this stuff if I were hiding part of myself because of fear of failure, because we all feel that. And weirdly, as soon as it came out, all I ever heard was great stuff. Like people liked that I also wrote, and I think it humanized my advice in a way that it made it feel more authentic. Maybe that I have been in the trenches too, and I really know what all this stuff feels like. I've been on both sides of the page.
Here's a question that I feel like I understand the subtext here. I wonder if what you'll think, Tiffany. Um, how would you say, or how would you answer, what's the difference between a writer and an author?
Oh, I will want to hear your answer too. I don't think there's a difference. You are the author of every word you've ever written, and I think it's used to stratify authors in a way that is meant to make people feel less than. So to me, I know people say, well, you're not an author until you're published. Published how, bro? You can get published in a million ways now. So what does that even mean? You get to define. The whole book, the new book, is about you get to define what your career is and how you run it and what agency you have in it and the autonomy and what path you take. We have a lot more control in this business than we think we do. And one of them is owning whatever terminology you want to use for yourself. So to me, you're all authors. What do you think?
I'm on the same page, but I think sometimes this is strictly from a technical industry perspective. Sometimes I think author is the term reserved for people who write books. But I think that's, as far as like general conversations and what you're talking about, I think that's the more important thing for people to know. Um, because I guess author gets tied up with what's the root of that word, authority or something. So I think sometimes I think it's tied to the book industry, but I don't have any like, that's a gut feeling. I don't have any evidence for that.
I mean, we're also asking the person, me, that always makes up words for things that I want to talk about because they make sense to me. So, own it. Take whatever word you want, I guess.
I mean, I will say it, like my own book is called The Business of Being a Writer and not The Business of Being an Author, because I thought author was too specific.
Mm,
Because I think of writers as people who may write and publish all sorts of materials. And
hmm.
I still tend to associate author with books. Okay.
I can see
Anyway.
that. And I love the word writer. I don't diminish that word at all. I mean, use whichever one you like, frankly.
Yeah.
But I don't think author is reserved to a select few.
No. Yarrow wonders if you have any advice for dealing with the nobody will want to read this feelings. For example, climate change is too depressing. People won't want to read about science. Yarrow struggles to find evidence that this particular demon is wrong, and fears the evidence is years off when I try to find an agent, publisher, etc. So she's worried she's going to learn that her demon
Right.
is correct about these things, that agents and editors aren't buying climate change novels or
Right.
books or whatever.
So if you want to be super literal about it, though, which I think it's a good thing to do with the demons because they're very childish and they're very literal, nobody is ever going to want to read this is clearly hyperbole, right? First off, of course, some people will want to read it. How many, you don't know. And ever going to want to read it? Maybe not today, maybe, as continued evidence of climate change comes out. Anyway, that's the first thing. But the second thing is, we're not trying to counter reality. It may very well be that whatever you're writing, there isn't a market for it right now. That's one of those external things we can't control. Or it may be that the way you're presenting it feels soapboxy and is about the mess. I'm not saying it is, but that is a common risk when you're writing about some strong held belief like that, is that it can come across like a message book when the message should actually be what the reader takes from a story, and you sort of lead them to water and hope that they're going to drink it, but you don't shove their heads in the water. So yeah, I think you have to consider the fact that may be true. And then you get to decide as an author, what are my goals? Does that matter to me? Is this a story I need to write for whatever reason? And if there isn't a big five market for it? Do I want to consider a small press? Do I want to consider indie pubbing it? Or whatever avenue you take? Is this a book I put in the drawer for a while until its time comes? Is this a story that if it's not marketable, maybe I will turn my attention to something else? These are decisions you get to make. What do you think, Jane?
Yes to all of that. And I would add people have the tendency to put agents and editors on pedestals or to think that they have the final word on what holds value, which of course they do not. Their view is very subjective. It's often a commercially driven, self-interested view of what's going to earn them money. And obviously we should not, I hope, be equating value with money. Um, Most, like the old cliche goes, most of the good things in life are free. Um, but I mean, you do have to face reality at some point that if the market is giving you the message that a big five publisher or an agent isn't going to be able to take this at this time, then you have decisions to make about what you want to do next.
But that doesn't mean don't write it necessarily. I mean,
Right.
we get to decide.
Catherine asks if you have any tips for when reading good writing triggers self doubt and judgment. She does not want to stop reading.
Yeah. So I think we have to identify what is happening, right? You have to identify your demons. So when we're reading good writing and it's making us feel like crap, what's actually happening there? Well, that's one of the demons. That's probably it's a comparison demon for sure. And you're using it as a yardstick to measure yourself by. So what you're really saying is, this is so good and I can't do that. This is so much better than what I would do. This is, I don't know, whatever it is the message is saying. Instead of assessing the thing you're reading and enjoying the thing you're reading, you're using it to reflect back on yourself. So actually, may I share a slide? Because I have a slide on this. I have a story on this too, actually, if anybody cares.
We care. Terrific.
Hang on. Look, okay, here's the story. This is Anne Garvin. Anne Garvin is she's a great author. She's also an amazing presenter. She's funny and enthusiastic and entertaining, and she knows her stuff, and her audiences love her. And I was at a conference, and right before my presentation, I went and watched Anne with a standing room only crowd hold them in the palm of her hand for like 50 minutes, which would have been a very easy time for me to use that stick element of comparison and competition, which is how to beat myself up. I'm taking the focus off the work I'm doing, and instead I'm putting it on getting whatever flag I have my sights set on that is an external outcome that I can't control. I want to be as good as Anne. I can't. I can be me. I can be as good as me. I can enjoy Anne, and I've worked with my own demons enough to do that. But do I want to define my life through someone else's lens? So hang on. Got to get my little thingy going. I had some little devices for that too. One is to focus on just the experience of it. When you're reading someone who's a lot better than you in your mind, that's a great learning. I mean, I talk all the time about analyzing other people's work, good and bad, because it teaches you in a way that is much more effective than trying to learn it in your own work often, because you don't have objectivity in your own work, and you do in someone else's work. So you can go, man, I'm really invested here. Why? And then you can go take it apart and dissect it and figure out what they're doing that's making you feel that way. And that's how you improve your own writing. You can simply enjoy the thing for what it is. Anne inspired me right after that to have one of the best presentations I think I've ever given, because she reminded me what I love about doing it and what's fun about doing it. So focus on those good intrinsic things. What can you learn from this thing? Make sure you're comparing apples to apples. If you are comparing yourself to Pulitzer Prize winners or authors who've been at this for 30 years and are huge bestsellers, or have whatever, oh, they sold 1 million books and I haven't. Yeah, they probably have a marketing push behind them that you also don't. So compare the same thing. And then I see this a lot in creatives and a lot of people. A zero-sum mindset is where you think, if you get yours, then I can't have mine, because there's a finite amount of pie. And if you take the pie, then there's no pie left for me. We're not in a zero-sum business. There are infinite pies and you're making pies all the time. And people who like pie like all the pie, or at least like the pie they like. And so just because they have 1,000 books on their bookshelf doesn't mean they're not going to buy yours. Here's another Anne Garvin story, since we're holding her up as some kind of flippin' saint. I'm just kidding. She has lots of demons too, which is why I love her. But she just released a book, I think called Bummer Camp. And at the exact same time, it's about adults at summer camp. And at the exact same time, two other authors who write as one author released a book called Until Next Summer, Allie Brady, Allison Hammer and Brady Godfrey. The books were about almost the same premise, totally different because they're all different writers. And rather than compete with each other and see themselves as, oh my God, if people buy your book, they won't buy mine, they did an event together. They threw an adult summer camp where they hosted fans for both of them, benefiting both of them. A rising tide lifts all boats. So when that happens and you are hearing those voices, use some of the other demon devices that I talked about, because those are all purpose ones, but those specific ones to competition and comparison can be useful.
I was actually going to ask you
tips.
Sorry. That was great. There was someone who wanted to see your last slide on the 5 steps just for a moment. Maybe that person can quickly screen capture it while we go on to the next question.
Okay, if no one minds me sharing again, I will do that. There.
There we go. Okay. Let's see. Catherine wonders if you have some go-to questions, tips, etc., for overwhelm and procrastination. She believes these are intertwined.
All right. If the person who wanted this slide has gotten it, then I will happily move on to that slide. I anticipated some of these questions. These are so, and I could probably share this slide deck. I don't mind. So I can do that. So yeah, there's our little writer's block baby, procrastination baby demon. So we all know what's happening here. The procrastination, or the question was writer's block, Jane, or procrastination?
Procrastination, intertwined with overwhelm. You have so much to do, you get paralyzed.
Right. Yeah. So part of that realizes self-made. Like, I'm in a very busy period right now. And I notice that I will be trying to grunt out whatever it is I'm working on. And then I'll be like, oh, this is so hard. I think I'm just going to go over to social media for a second, or I think I'm going to check my email, or I need to clean out the dryer vent, or any of 1,000 things we can distract ourselves with. So in some ways, I'm making it worse. One of the best books I've read recently is by Alex Soojung Kim Pang. It's on my main shelf, my shelf of honor, called Rest. And what he says in that book is that it's counterintuitive, but a lot of times when we're overwhelmed, the instinct, I call this sort of I'm going to curse for a second. Sorry, folks, the wall of what the fuck. The instinct is to just keep battering at the wall until you just get past it, all the overwhelm. But that doesn't really do anything but wear you out, and it's not effective. So counterintuitively, if you step away completely, even if it's just for a few minutes, break that mindset where you're just drowning, and get out and go for a walk, or, I go jump. I have a mini trampoline. I'll go jump on it for 5 minutes because I can't do that and not be happy. Whatever it is that gives you just even a minute's rest from what that thing is can help you shore back up. But first, you got to notice that you're doing it. A lot of times, I think when we're doing the procrastination thing, oh, I'm doing research for my novel. But are you? Or I have to take care of this to-do list item before I can work, or I have to discharge all of my work responsibilities. But do you? Question the premises and notice what you're doing. Then diagnose what is causing this. There's a reason you're procrastinating, and there is a reason that builds on the overwhelm. It usually has something to do with, I got overwhelmed right on here. Story issues sometimes will make us procrastinate if the story's not coming together like we want it to, or we're stuck, or we're bored, or we're not inspired. Situational issues, and that can be the distraction, but it can also be your office is cluttered. It's noisy. People keep interrupting you, whatever it is. Psychological issues, that's the demons, that's all the stuff we're talking about. Intention and motivation issues. If you've lost sight of your your story question, for example, which is something I talk about a lot, is the central driving propulsive force of your story. If you lose sight of what that is, you might lose your motivation. If you lose sight of why you wanted to write this thing in the first place, or if you're writing from the outside in, I see this a lot with like people will say, oh, I'm faithfully following Save the Cat or whatever the system is. These are great. But if you're trying to cram your story into someone else's mold, a lot of times like your psyche rebels and just stops. You've got to grow that from the inside out. And then in editing is when, if you want to, you can come back and see if you've hit all your beats or whatever it is you want to do. And then once you know what the problem is, just address the problem. That sounds easy, I know. But once you diagnose what it is, it's much simpler to figure out, my office is cluttered, I will clear it. Or am I using this as another procrastination device? So be ruthlessly honest with yourself. Jane, do you have thoughts on that? I'm going to stop this share again.
Well, I have a tie-in question, which I think you've addressed this in part, but I know that it's something that stalls a lot of folks. Katie is trying to execute suggested edits on her memoir. She got some suggestions back from a developmental editor. There's some other people in the Q&A box who are dealing with really big projects and are, getting the writer's block issue. Katie in particular is second guessing everything because she knows she could write and rewrite a gazillion different ways. So there's this feeling like, how do I stay on track and move forward without second guessing, third guessing? And I know other people are like, I have limited time and I can't afford to do another revision. How do I get it right the first time?
So I call this revision mountain when we're looking at the whole thing going, I will never be able to get up there. You just have to take one little step at a time. I have a whole approach that I advise in intuitive editing, which is start with the macro level stuff, the biggest stuff. If there's like some major character issue, fix that first because that's part of the foundation. And then you go through and then you look at, okay, now do I have a next biggest problem and a next biggest problem? Then you can go in and look at the line by line things and start correcting those little at a time. Or if it helps you, start with the little stuff because that gives you a nice jump on things. But a lot of times that stuff can be counterproductive because if there is big foundational stuff and you're worried about, what's the right word here for sunshine, then you're wasting more time, but that may not even make it into the final version once you make big changes. But I think you just have to break it into manageable bites. And one I've been talking about a lot lately is I have a sign in my office that says faith. And I am not a particularly religious person. That's not what it means to me. It means I have faith in myself that no matter how daunting this thing seems, I'm going to figure it out. I always do. Eventually, it might be hard. And ask Jane about me and point of view. I hate doing point of view. And every time I do, I think, I just can't do it. It's too big. It's too much. And I'll never be able to figure this nut out. But then I just start taking one little point at a time and I will solve this problem and then I will solve this problem. You take one step and one step and one step, and before you know it, you're done.
I think that's why Bird by Anne Lamott has such staying power because it's right in the title. That's the advice she gives, or it's like part of the really famous anecdote about the father and the son. And he's like, I don't know how I'll ever get this bird report done. And he's like, bird by bird, son, bird by bird.
Yeah, I got shivers when you said that because it's true. I think that's why we feel overwhelmed, is all we're seeing is everything instead of start here. Just start here with this one thing. And also, if I may say one more thing about publishing, and I think you'll back me up on this, it's very deadline oriented, but there's almost always wiggle room in that deadline, people, because nobody wants to put out a book that is less than the best it can be. So it never hurts. If you're worth a publisher, ask for an extension. I can't tell you how often it happens when I'm working with publishers as an editor. And if it's your own personal deadline, just remember you can change that. You don't have to kill yourself over it. Jane and I were just talking about this with an article. I told her, I'm going to try to turn this into you by this date, but I might not. And that's okay.
Okay. So I have a question for you.
Okay.
And if you don't have an answer, that's okay, because I did not screen this with you first. What happens when your worst fears are realized? Like you have this idea in your head that I'm not a good keynote speaker. And then maybe you get some message afterward that's like, yeah, you sucked.
I love that question. In the book, I talk about, do you know the podcast Dead Eyes?
I don't.
Oh, cannot recommend it enough. It's by an actor named Connor Ratliff. And here's just quickly his story. 20 years ago, when he was early in his acting career, he auditioned for Band of Brothers. And his idol was Tom Hanks. Steven Spielberg was the other director of that. And he got a small role. And it was just like he thought this was going to make his career. And then right before he was supposed to film it, they called him back into the office. Have you heard this story? They called him back into the office and they said, Tom wants to, because Tom Hanks was not actually at his audition because it was a small role, but they said, Tom wants to audition you directly. And so he went and auditioned for Tom Hanks, and then they took the role away from him. And later on, his agent told him, yeah, Tom Hanks said you have dead eyes. So like, that's as big a failure as I can imagine. It's devastating. And he said it was gutting. It took him out of acting for years. He became a dishwasher. He became a teacher. And then eventually he realized he was defining himself by this external thing this one thing that had happened, this external opinion that he had no idea what it was based on. So he started acting again, and he's gradually, like he was just in the movie Mean Girls. He's not a major actor. You may not know him, but you've probably seen him in stuff like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And he started this podcast because he just wanted to understand rejection and how you can experience failure and rejection and still pursue the thing you want. And he interviews people like John Hamm, and he gets amazing guests on there that are all people he knows or has worked with. And they just talk about every aspect. It's acting, but it's about creativity and how you cope with all the hard parts of it. I cannot recommend it enough for creatives. And the last episode, he got to talk to Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks did not remember saying this. He was horrified. He said, if I said it, I own up to that. But he said, I don't know why. And it probably was something as simple as a height issue, or I had a bad day, or whatever. It's one of the best celebrity interviews you'll ever hear. But the point of it is, this thing that had defined him for so long, we don't even know. I mean, it was a game of telephone. His agent said that a production assistant told him that Tom Hanks said, and he based so many career decisions on it. And he realized that wasn't how he wanted to conduct his career, because it wasn't about that. It was about his day-to-day enjoyment of his craft, and he let it take that away from him. So for what that's worth, that is my long answer.
That's terrific. Thank you. All right, we're just a couple minutes from the end. I'm just going to share one thing that I've always found very useful. It's actually from Elizabeth Gilbert. And then Tiffany, maybe you have some parting words of wisdom.
Gilbert is the name I couldn't think of.
Yes, the big magic lady. I think it's in that book, Big Magic, if I'm not mistaken.
Which is great.
She talks about how, about the demons, obviously. And she says, they're always going to be around for the ride, but you don't put them in the driver's seat.
Oh, I love that.
Which is, I think, a brilliant way of thinking about it, and not expecting that they're not going to be there, but please don't give them control, like maybe that guy did with his, like the Dead Eyes guy. So
yeah, you can still have a fun ride. Just put him in the back seat.
Now back to you for any closing thoughts you have.
Oh, I don't really, I mean, if you want to dig deeper into all this, all the questions you've got, I get real specific about it in the book. But other than that, just, I guess, be kind, be your own champion, and be kind to yourselves. It's really hard for us to do that a lot of times, I think, but we are kind to almost everyone in our community. And I hope we can bring some of that compassion to ourselves.
Terrific. Everyone, thank you for joining us for today's Sunday sermon. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great week ahead.
Thank you, Jane. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.